Michigan cornerback Will Johnson is one of the few 2025 NFL draft prospects that can help catapult your team closer to the Super Bowl for 2026. We're going to talk about this and more coming up next.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your boy, Damian Parson. I am an offensive draft analyst over with Bleacher Report, and that's my guy, Keith Sanchez. He is the director of scouting with the Draft Network and 2019 national champion with those LSU Tigers. Guys, thank you for tapping in with us each and every day and being our everydayers. We have a fun show, NFL Draft, tied with a little Super Bowl, 3 NFL draft prospects for the 2025 NFL draft that can help you make the Super Bowl next year, reviewing the Philadelphia Eagles recent draft picks that they've hit on and reviewing the Chiefs recent draft picks that they've hit on. But guys, before we get into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Keith, when you talk, we look at this draft and people say it's a down year, all that good stuff. There's some legitimate guys that if they land in the right spots, we could be seeing them as rookies, not just in the playoffs, but potentially in the Super Bowl for 2025, 2026. And Keith, one of the first names that come to mind for me, I know everybody looks at, you probably think I'm going to mention Abdul Carr off the jump. I'm not. Gotcha. I'm going to Will Johnson, the cornerback from Michigan, Keith. And I think, we'll talk about the Eagles draft picks, but I look at what they did last year, the 2024 NFL draft, getting Quinyon Mitchell round 1, getting Cooper DeJean in round 2, the pair with Darius Slay and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and all those other guys that they have in that defense, especially with that defensive line. Quinyon Mitchell played outstanding ball this year. Cooper DeJean, outstanding for them, hitting on guys at the cornerback position where you can leave them on the island, leave them on one-on-one. They fit the scheme that you want to run, and you just let them be natural playmakers. Now we saw that defense really elevate because they have the front seven. Whether when the Kobe Dean was healthy, that defensive line got back there. The front seven did well, but they needed to improve the cornerback position. Quinyon and Cooper DeJean, probably two of the, I would say, MVPs, most valuable prospects from the 2024 NFL draft, because if the Eagles don't make those picks, I don't think they are here. Their defense doesn't play as well as they played. So I look at the Will Johnson, and there's been a lot of talk. Keith, you like to use the phrase out of sight, out of mind when guys are injured. And all this cute talk about, man, the NFL's lower on them, man, he might fall to the 20s, man. Listen, I respect the people who are putting that out. No disrespect to you. But how many times have we seen the NFL feed these guys information just so a guy could fall to them and they get the pick of the litter? I don't have to trade up for a Will Johnson. If you're a team like the Los Angeles Rams and you know you need a corner, I might tell certain people that, hey, put it out on Twitter, put it on your podcast that we're all lower on Will Johnson. And you go put that out, now he fall to him at 18 or wherever the Rams are picking, and you get a Will Johnson. I think Will Johnson is one of those prospects that, let's not get cute about. This is a guy that could absolutely revamp. And I think about playoff contenders from this year that could absolutely use him, Keith. The Baltimore Ravens. The opposing quarterbacks stayed away from Nate Wiggins. They didn't like to really test Marlon Humphrey late in the season. They picked out one guy every time. That was Brandon Stevens. Like, you need another corner out beside him. If you had a Will Johnson with those two guys, you're playing lockdown coverage.
Yeah, so DP, do you think that Will Johnson falls? Is that what you're saying? Do you think he falls, or are you saying
no? He shouldn't. I don't think he should. I don't think he will. I think I think smoke screen season is here a little bit earlier, Keith. I think smoke screen season is here a little bit earlier, but there's been a lot of talks about, the NFL's not as high on him as the consensus draft Twitter supposedly.
Okay, so all right. Yeah, so you still expect him to go like top 10, top 15 in your?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not buying the hype. I'm not buying the hype, Keith.
All right, cool. I'm gonna go with some playoff contending teams, and I guess some prospects that may fall right into that 25 to 30. And I couldn't help but think about the Detroit Lions and them grabbing an edge rusher, right? And to be honest with you, if we've done this so many times, there's a host of edge rushers that could potentially go there, right? Maybe you get James Pierce, maybe you get Kyle Kennard, Jack Sawyer, right? I think there's a host of guys. How high does Mike Green go, or how much does he fall, right? There's still more data points once we get to the combine, but I think of two places: Detroit Lions go and get an edge rusher that can definitely boost them to the Super Bowl, right? And then I think getting a tight end for the Chargers, and I talked about this previously, getting a tight end for the Chargers could be huge because it gives them an opportunity to have somebody to operate the middle of the field.
100%. I think the Chargers, it's 3 teams in the first round that could absolutely go with tight end. It's the Colts, it's the Broncos, and then it's the Chargers. All 3 teams have a big gaping hole and need at the tight end position. Then Chris Ballard from the Colts actually did a press conference and said, yeah, I like the way our guys this year blocked, but I got to get Shane Steichen and company, somebody that can control the middle of the field. And admitting that, to me, already kind of tips your hand that you're looking to go tight end early. So I agree with you, especially on the Detroit Lions, especially. Like, you know, not having Aiden Hutchinson. They do have Darius Smith, who I think has another year or so on this contract. So at least when you have him as that veteran in the room while Aiden tries to get back up to full speed, and we don't know if he's going to start the season on the PUP list. We don't know, right? That was a little nasty leg injury. So we got to kind of play it by ear. That's your franchise. You don't want to rush him back, let him get back to full health, and let him be at a place mentally where he's ready to go. I think, like you said, there's so many different edge rushers in this group that whether it is a Jack Sawyer, Shamar Stewart at 6'6", 290, I'm not gonna lie, that's really intriguing. If he's there for the Detroit Lions, like I think you make the move. You know what I mean? I think you make the move. You put him. I always say you put that young rookie's locker right beside the Darius Smiths, and let him just, because the one thing you want to like really coach him up on is hand usage, how to use his hands and how to have that true pass rush plan and be a professional. But I think Shamar Stewart is only 21 years old, so he's still super young as a prospect and as a player and a person. So him, a guy that I think is a sneaky fit for them, Keith. A lot of people probably won't like it because he's not going to have the athletic testing that you would want. Is going to be Jack Sawyer from Ohio State at 6'5", 260.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
This is a Dan Campbell bite the kneecap, chew the kneecap, whatever kneecap stuff that Dan Campbell talks about. That's what Jack Sawyer is. He gives you the exact same kind of energy and play style, or play like that style of motor that Aiden Hutchinson gives. So I think when you look at just, we were going to talk about 3, but we talked about a couple different guys. I think Mason Graham, Keith, I for teams in the top 10, like you think about the Jacksonville Jaguars they have a talented team. It's just the fact that there was a lot of things structurally that went wrong.
Right, when you say the Will Johnsons, the Mason Grahams, are you saying, because obviously those guys expected to go high, do you think that where they get drafted, they boost these teams into the Super Bowl conversation? Like, is that what you're saying? Like, if they go
I think they could, depending on where they land, for sure. Depending on when they land. Of course, the Raiders got to figure out the quarterback situation. But I look at Jacksonville, you got your quarterback. You don't need, to address that situation. You have a budding young star in Brian Thomas Jr. You have multiple tight ends. You got 2 running backs. You have a new coach now who's going to try and like really design that offense for Trevor Lawrence. I look at it like you put a Mason Graham on that defense with Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen Hines? I think that's his name. Josh Allen Hines, formerly known as Josh Allen, and with Devin Lloyd at the second level. That's going to help. Like, as much as we want to give him a corner early, getting a Mason Graham to put, and then you got Mason Smith. So you have the Taylor 2 Masons. You got Mason Smith from LSU. You drafted 2nd round last year. If you can get him to hit, if he hits, and you add a Mason Graham beside him, yeah, that front 4, you're not blitzing. You drop in 7 in coverage almost every time. You want to get to CJ Stroud. You're trying to get to Anthony Richardson. Whoever's under center for the Tennessee Titans, I think Mason Graham, like I said, it all depends on where they land. But these are the type of guys that have that game-changing talent. When we saw CJ Stroud and Will Anderson get drafted back-to-back in 2023, Keith, no one believed that they would be in the playoffs that next season as rookies. But they were. They've been in this playoffs back-to-back seasons, and those are 2 of the more impactful draft picks for that team. So I do think, depending on where some of these guys land, the Abdul Carters, the Mason Grahams, Travis Hunter's another one, Keith. Like, I mean, depending on where he lands, man, like, he can change the momentum depending on if he's playing corner or wide receiver. Like, if he gets to New England and you got him and Christian Gonzalez, you got Christian Barmore back, that defense is going to be very difficult to score on. Now that makes Drake May's job a lot easier. Now as you get him some more weapons, use your money in free agency. It's all about how these teams really finagle free agency and everything else. But there's some prospects in this class that can absolutely help catapult a team either into the playoffs or into the Super Bowl.
Well, DP, let's keep this thing going and flowing. And coming up next, we're going to talk about the Eagles draft picks, right? How did they get back to the Super Bowl? We're going to look at their past few draft classes and get into that conversation coming up next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags that we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships, those green flags? If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, or building a friendship, guys, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves communication skills. It empowers you to set expectations and express your needs in relationships. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp. HELP.com/lockedon. The Philadelphia Eagles, let's review their recent drafts. Let's look at the last 2 years or so. Matter of fact, we can go back three. Keith, and starting with 2024. We talked about in the first topic, man. Quinyon Mitchell, first round. Cooper DeJean in round 2. Hitting on those guys, right? Those are the main two guys who've been actual key contributors all season for them. Jeremiah Trotter has come in, I think, with the injury of Nakobe Dean. Will Shipley has made an appearance here or there. Jalix Hunt, same thing. But those are the two guys for them, hitting on them because they had a big need at the cornerback position. We walked into that offseason last year. James Bradbury wasn't playing well. It was all on Darius Slay. We were hopeful of Akili Ringo and I forget the young man from Elias Ricks. Ricks, you were hoping that we would see if they would be able to develop and stick with this. And then they brought in Vic Fangio. And when they made that decision to go to more of that cover 4, that zone scheme, and I'm like, okay, getting Quinyon and Cooper DeJean, where you can get some man match principles out of it as well. Yeah, like this was a hit. They hit on both of those guys. Of course, Keith, 2023, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Sidney Brown in that draft. 2022, Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis. And I'm going to go back to 2021 real quick as well. 3 picks out of that class. Devonta Smith, Landon Dickerson, and Milton Williams. You talk about big-time producers for a team that's in the Super Bowl. Howie Roseman, some fans hated every draft when Howie Roseman sits on the board, plays coy, just waits and waits. Then he takes one of the best players, or he goes hot, like Howie Roseman probably will be my spirit animal. He goes ceiling almost every time. He goes ceiling almost every single pick that he goes with, but he's been one of the best drafting GMs in the league over the last, decade, it feels like.
Yeah, I agree with you, DP. And I look at it from the perspective of that's the reason why they're in the Super Bowl, right? You look at the past few draft classes and what they were able to do, and they hit home runs, right? Like you're talking about Jalen Carter, Milton Williams. This defensive line is a really formidable front. Then you think about guys like Tyler Steen, Sidney Brown, Devontae Smith, right? Those are the kind of second tier, but still somewhat premier football players for this draft. And then, like you said, the young guys, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, being able to hit on those guys. And I think when you look at that, what happens is your draft allows you to be aggressive in free agency and through trading, right? Like you set the foundation with your draft, but then you look at bringing in guys like AJ Brown and then Saquon Barkley is all because you drafted well. You had a good foundation and you didn't allow free agency just to kind of dictate. So you look at all of these teams that's looking for, hey, how do I get to this position? You have to draft well, right? And that's why you listen to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, because we're able to put it out there. I even look at Moro Ojomo. That's a guy that's having a rotation that they got in the 7th round that I liked a lot more than a 7th rounder when he came out. But he played Philadelphia and can give valuable snaps at the end of the day.
And I think, I'm glad you brought up Morrow, because they're going to lose Milton Williams to free agency this offseason. After the Super Bowl is over, he's hitting free agency. Remember, they lost Javon Hargrave to the San Francisco 49ers either offseason or 2 ago, because you can't pay everybody, right? So Moro Ojomo is basically being a good rotational player for him now. He might be one of their future starters with Milton Williams walking off in the free agency, getting the bag from another team and getting paid. They have done just a great job. Keith, when I look at the Philadelphia Eagles, their D-line situation, it reminds me of those, if you talk about it, like I said, like it's like been 10 years, but because of how Georgia looked this year, but like the previous couple of years of Georgia, where they just would rotate guys in and you're like, what is going on? Like, you got so much depth on your D-line that I just imagine the offensive lineman sitting there breaking the huddle. They're like, wait a minute, is that a fresh 300-pounder coming off the sideline who hasn't played all game? Like, come on, man. So I think they've done just a great job. And Keith, it's been whenever you pay your quarterback, it puts onus on the GM, your scouting director, and the scouts to identify talent that's going to fit your team and to develop those guys and who you draft. Because once you start paying your quarterback, they always say like the championship window is when the quarterback's in a rookie deal. Well, the Eagles paid Jalen Hurts. He already been to a Super Bowl. He earned his paycheck, right? Well, now that means you got to hit on these picks to keep the team around him where it needs to be, so you can get back there like they have this weekend. And I just think they've done an outstanding job just hitting on, like, literally just getting the Devonta Smith, like you said, bring it in. It was crazy, Keith, because I didn't know this, but they got Devonta Smith the year after whiffing on Jalen Reagor. The year before they drafted Jalen Reagor, then the very next year,
they just went back at it.
First round pick, 10th pick overall, or something like 10th or 11th pick overall, they draft Devonta Smith. And then Devonta Smith has a good rookie year. Then they go get, they call him Swole Batman, A.J. Brown. You have Dallas Goedert, who's already been there, right? Who took over. Like, again, there's a guy they drafted to replace Zach Ertz. They've done such an incredible job of not just like identifying talent, drafting. And this is not a team that you say, okay, we got to be like super aggressive. As certain teams are like, man, we got to trade up. We got I feel like Howie Roseman's that cool, calm, collector in the war room, Keith, where you're like, he's just sitting there like, man, listen, this is our guy that we want. Well, if he's drafted, we're good.
Yeah, with DP, one of those first rounders, from a couple years ago, come from the Saints. Remember, the Saints traded up, I believe, was that to draft Trevor Penning? It was either Trevor Penning or Chris Olave. Remember, they traded up. I think it was Trevor Penning, which allowed them to go back to back, I believe, to get, I believe that was the Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith situation, right? Because the 2022 draft drafted, and then they had the extra first rounder, and then they went Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, I believe, if I'm correct in that situation. But yeah, and look how that played out, right? Trading back, cool. Y'all can have Trevor Penning. We'll end up with Jordan Davis, and Jordan Davis, I believe he had a big time play. I think that was the divisional round against the Rams, had a big time sack. So you're seeing all of the moves created, and I even went back and looked at their past draft history. When the Eagles wasn't that good, it's because they wasn't drafting well, right? So everything correlates, and you're able to see how it flows and how it comes together. And usually you have to string together a couple draft classes to get where you are now as far as being a Super Bowl contender. But we're seeing that with the Philadelphia Eagles. But DP, the Philadelphia Eagles, they're playing the Chiefs, right? We have to have this conversation and talk about how has the Kansas City Chiefs draft classes been going in the past few years. Is that the direct correlation between why they're in the Super Bowl again, outside of that bad man, Mr. Patrick Mahomes? We're going to have that conversation coming up next.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. And the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, well, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head over to FanDuel.com to get started and join today. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 back in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com to join and get started today. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. The big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks has even a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. Guys, you can get all of that. All you need to do is download the app today, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shout out for being our everydayers. Guys, reviewing the Kansas City Chiefs' recent draft history, of course, 2024, Xavier Worthy, that trade with the Buffalo Bills that some Bills fans will probably never forgive, giving Xavier Worthy to Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid. They got Kingsley Su'a-Mata'ia from BYU. Jaden Hicks, a guy that me and you, Keith, we both really liked coming out of Washington State, the safety in the 4th round. The year before, they went Felix Nduke-Uzoma, defensive end out of Kansas State. Rashee Rice in the 2nd round, who ended up being one of their top receivers, arguably and honestly their top receiver since being drafted before getting hurt this year. Then you look at the year before, Trent McDuffie in round 1. They had 2 first-round picks. They got Trent McDuffie at 21. They got George Karlaftis III with pick 30. They got Brian Cook, who's been starting at one of their safety spots in the 2nd round because they had 2 firsts. That was the Tyreek Hill trade year where they had 2 firsts and 2 seconds. They got Leo Chenal in the 3rd that year. Also, they got Joshua Williams as one of their, and they got Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th round in that draft. And then you look at the year before that, 2021, Nick Bolton, one of their top linebackers in round 2, because they didn't have a first-round pick that year. Creed Humphrey in round 2. They got Noah Gray, who's been one of their solid backup tight ends, and one of their better offensive linemen, Trey Smith. They got him in the 6th out of Tennessee, man. Like, it's, again, similar to what I talked about with the Eagles. Once you pay your quarterback, you got to draft well. You got to hit on these draft picks. And don't get me wrong, have they been spotless? No, they got the sky. For every Trent McDuffie, there's a Sky Moore, right? Like, you have some picks that didn't land or didn't work out, for you, right? The situation with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Lucas Niang, and they got L'Jarius Sneed in 2024 in the 4th round, which is crazy to think about, right? Like, they drafted L'Jarius Sneed in the 4th round. Like, they've done a good job overall getting players that fit what they want to do, that fits well in their system and their locker room. And then, of course, like you said, Keith, they got that bad men, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid to help kind of control the ship and the bad trio, because Spags has been cooking since, he's been cooking for a minute now over there in Kansas City. They've just done a really good job, man. They've done an outstanding job being able to get the right pieces, the right fits, using their draft picks. You're not going to hit on all 7 rounds, but you got to hit on the early ones. 1st, 2nd, even 3rd, hit on some 4ths, and you have yourself in the Super Bowl again.
Yeah, DP, and they draft culture, right? Like, they draft high, it looks to be like high IQ football players that have had a lot of experience that just flat out go play football. I think the most important draft was that 2021 draft, because I believe is that coming off of the year that they lost the Super Bowl to the Bucks, right? When
I think so.
that might have been a sideways Superman throw for Patrick Mahomes, and they needed offensive line help. That was clear as day. And they said, you know what? We're going to go get 2 guys, right? And Trey Smith, they drafted at the back end of the draft. They said, you know what? We believe in what the upside can be. Plug and play. He's played solid football for them since then. Creed Humphrey, drafting him, has played really good football for them since then. And then, like you say, sprinkled in there, once you have a really good quarterback, you get him an offensive line, and then then now you try to supplement certain pieces. Like you think about the Rashee Rice addition and when he was healthy, what he was able to do for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? But then I also look at George Karlaftis, the Leo Chenals, the Brian Cooks. Right now, those guys are key and pivotal parts of the Kansas City Chiefs defense, right? At the end of the day, like they mean a lot to this defense. And are they superior athletes? No, but they're really good, solid football players that are very smart, and everything Spags wants to do, they can execute at a high level. And that's what makes this Spags defense so creative and versatile, is because they have the players to do it.
100%. I mean, again, like this is a team that besides the Clyde Edwards-Helaire draft, they haven't drafted running backs early since then, or even before that, really. And the hit on Isaiah Pacheco in round 7, and he be your lead rusher and help lead your running game to the Super Bowl, and what I mean, and being that guy. Do I think that they need to be looking at adding a running back in 2025? 100%. Like I no disrespect to Pacheco, but after he came back from that injury, he hasn't looked the same. Kareem Hunt has looked like the better player, truthfully. And this is not prime Kareem Hunt, which is funny because going back to even looking a little bit further back, 2017, they drafted Mahomes in the first round and they got Kareem Hunt in the third. Like to hit those 2 picks, as early as you did. Kareem Hunt, of course, got on the field before Mahomes because he started his season out first while Alex Smith was really the starter there. They were getting that trade prepared at the end of the season. Like Andy Reid, listen, if you're a talented offensive player, I believe Andy Reid can get the best out of you, right? Long as you work and do what you're supposed to do, yeah, Andy Reid gonna put you in position to succeed, man. So when you look at this game, like the Xavier Worthy, and they like to throw a lot of the bubble screens and like that the jet motion handoffs.
That we'll know that post Super Bowl how important that Xavier Worthy pickup was, right? To just go draft a guy that can run the 4.21, 4.19, just the fastest person out there, right?
100%. I think that that matchup with Cooper DeJean and his ability to trigger downhill from the slot and tackle in space, and Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay, and what they're this game is going to be, as much as it's going to be about the quarterbacks, some of these draft picks, these recent draft picks, are going to have some big impacts, whether positively or negatively, Keith, in this game to decide who's going to win. So your teams are built in the off season, but it all starts through the draft, Keith. You gotta hit your draft picks. No matter how much money you spend in free agency, baby, you gotta hit on the cost-efficient contracts and get yourself some playmakers offensively and defensively through the draft.
Well, DP, I think that's a good case right there that you just made of why you should tap into the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. If you want your team to go to the Super Bowl, it all starts with the draft, and that's why you tap in with your guys over here. Listen, I want to end this podcast off by saying shout out to our everydayers. Thank you for tapping in with us each and every single day. Every listen is greatly appreciated here over at Locked On NFL Draft. I am Keith Sanchez. You can find me on X at The Talent Code. That right there is my guy, my co-host, Mr. Damian Parson. You can find him on X at DP_NFL. And like we like to say, man, y'all come talk to us because we like to talk back.
Go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shout out for being our everydayers. Go enjoy Super Bowl 59, a fun football weekend, and come and join the conversation again on Monday on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.